It's so good to be here, and Pastor Pat has been welcoming us so well. Thank you very much. We have some pictures here. This is 10 years ago when the first short-time mission trip was in Estonia from your church. And this was a youth camp that your people helped to run. The next picture shows you the team from America that was in Estonia. Crick is in the middle, Crick Poirier, Pastor Mark Alund, and some other people. So Jessica, probably there at the middle. Thank you for being starting this partnership 10 years ago. And there will be some more pictures. I think 5 times your people have been to Estonia, helping enormously in our youth camp, to running youth camps, not for just church youth, but they are outreach camps. A sailing camp that this elderly man, brother from our church, has been leading. He's a sailing trainer, coach, and has been leading a sailing camp, a hobby camp, for 50 years. And being a Christian now for, when he started, he was not a Christian. But I think 30 years ago, he became a Christian, and now he has been running this hobby camp, generally publicly, but being a Christian there, sharing the good news here and there, just saying that prayer is important, Jesus is important, handing out the Gospels of Luke and letting the kids read it and having a quiz afterwards on the content of the Gospel, just being creative. And your teams have been part of that camp several times, just having some campfire talks and connected to the youth. Next slide, please. Yes, one more team there. I see some familiar people. So this has been our 10 years history, and it's worth celebrating. Thank you very much. I'll just tell you briefly how it started out, how Crick and Mindy Poirier happened to come to Estonia. It was 11 years ago, when I was visiting America as an interpreter for an Estonian pastor. Actually, he was the president of the Estonian Baptist Union, and Converge invited him for the convention to preach. And his English is not so good, so I was as his interpreter, a little guy among the big ones. And our youth leader at the church at that time said that as you will be traveling there in the States, maybe you will meet somebody, a student or somebody who would like to take 1 year off, and this would be a help to our youth ministry. Maybe. And he gave me some leaflets about our youth ministry. And so when I had the opportunity, I gave out this leaflet. Maybe it will touch somebody. At some point, I was at the table with some important people of the Converge convention, and there happened to be a person at the table who was the missions director of Converge, Levi Velasco, at that time. And he took the leaflet, and after some time, it was his time to be on the stage, and he took the leaflet there and said to everybody that Estonia is looking for a missionary. Well, this was a big thing for me. Now, let's stop there and go back to Crick and Mindy. Crick and Mindy had been married for a short time. They had been to mission fields independently, alone, and now as a couple they were looking for God's guidance, what to do, where should we go as missionaries. They were feeling that God is calling them to be missionaries. And they had been praying, the two of them, for a while about that. Then at one Sunday after the service, they went to their pastor that, please, would you pray for us? We are looking for guidance from the Holy Spirit. They prayed. Then the next week, their pastor went to this Converge convention. And their pastor heard this announcement from the stage that Estonia is looking for a missionary. He went home and told this to Crick and Mindy. Crick had been to one short-time mission trip to Estonia with some Christian organization. And this clicked with Crick. And they connected us. And the next summer, they came with a short-time mission team. The first time we saw the picture there. And then it took them another 3 years probably to prepare to be missionaries, and then they ended up in Estonia. So you see, sometimes the small thing that you do, like in a puzzle, you put the small piece of puzzle, like I took this leaflet from our youth leader and handed it out to somebody. This might be a part of an important picture of God's. Amen. And so you can be, we all can be, when we are faithful in our small parts, we can create this beautiful picture of God. So, I want to talk to you in the sermon about one man from the Bible, one disciple, whom we don't know so much about, we don't talk so much about. He's one of the disciples of Jesus. When you think of the disciples, the 12 disciples of Jesus, what names come to your mind first? Help me. John, the one who is the deep guy who wrote the Gospel of John, that's hard to read. Who else? Matthew, who was a tax collector and converted and wrote another Gospel. Who else? Peter, of course, the leading guy who was the spokesman. Always the first. Who else? Thomas, the skeptic. Yes. Then we have James. Bartholomew. Now you have read the Bible more thoroughly. Then there was the Judas who betrayed Jesus, and you never name your children after that. But then there are some names that we know, but we don't know much about them. And there is this one guy, Andrew, that I want to talk to today, this morning. Andrew has become such a familiar name nowadays. I looked it up that there are almost 900,000 Andrews in the United States walking around. Probably among you as well. So, for example, when you take a vacation, fly somewhere and the pilot greets you, it might as well be that he says, "Hello, I'm your pilot, Andrew." Or you go to the groceries and you see this security man with a name tag, Andrew. Or you listen to the news, watch the news, and there is an interview with a scientist named Andrew. You find Andrews everywhere. You have campaign managers, movie writers, golf players, newspaper sellers, Andrews everywhere. And then one of the disciples of Jesus was Andrew. He was not the most famous one. He was not the one who had 10 talents out of 10. He wasn't either the one who had 2 talents out of 10. He was somewhere in the middle, an average, an ordinary follower of Jesus. He didn't preach in front of thousands. He did not write any gospel that we know of. Maybe he was part of the technical team, cooked in the kitchen, ushered in the newcomers, or played with the children, just talked to some people. And actually, in the society, we need such kind of Andrews. We need a lot of them, not just some of them. And in the churches, we need such kind of Andrews, and we need a lot of them. Without the Andrews, the world would not move on. And without the Andrews, the church, your church, our church in Estonia would not move on. Actually, I think that many of the problems, or some of the problems in the church, origin from the fact that there are too few Andrews, too many people who want to be the Peters and the Johns, and too few of those who want to be the Andrews. Yes, we do need the Peters and the Johns, and God bless them. But not everybody is a Peter and a John. So, what do we know about this disciple, the Andrew? There are 3 stories, only 3 stories about him in the Bible, in the Gospels. But in all of those, there is one thing in common, and I would like to bring this out today. We'll read the first story from John, first chapter, verses 35 to 42. And it says so. The next day, John the Baptist, was there again with 2 of his disciples. When he saw Jesus passing by, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." When the 2 disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asked, "What do you want?" They said, "Rabbi, where are you staying?" "Come," he replied, "and you will see." So they went and saw where he was staying and spent the day with him. It was about the 10th hour. Andrew, now the name this disciple comes in. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the 2 who heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, "We have found the Messiah." And he brought him to Jesus. This is the word of God. So, he was a guy who brought his brother to Jesus. He probably was the younger brother of Peter. Peter was the spokesman of all the disciples. Probably the oldest of the disciples. So that's why we think that Andrew must have been the younger brother. So, most probably Andrew had grown up in the shadow of his older brother, being the small boy. When the brothers chose what game to play, then guess who got to choose? It was Peter who said, "We'll play this game." Later on, when they were fishing in the boat, and somebody shouted from the shore, "Hey, did you get any fish?" Then guess who answered? It was Peter. This happened not only in the family. Andrew was often left out of the game even later, even being as a disciple. Why do I think like that? Among the 12 disciples, there were 2 pairs of brothers. There was John and James, and there was Peter and Andrew. Now, out of those 12, Jesus had 3 that were closer to him, whom he discipled more thoroughly. When Jesus had some special moments, like in the Garden of Gethsemane, he invited 3 of the disciples to join him and pray. When Jesus went to the Mount of Transfiguration, where he had a special revelation, then he invited 3 of the 12 to join him. Now, who were the 3? There were two brothers, John and James, and there was Peter, and there was no Andrew. Andrew was among the other ones. He was not left completely out, but he was in the second group. So, Andrew was an ordinary believer. He was a faithful believer. He followed Jesus until the end, but we don't know very much about him. But there are 3 stories, and there is one thing in common in all of those stories. So the first story we read already, it showed that Andrew initially was the disciple of John the Baptist, and when John the Baptist recognized Jesus as the Messiah, then he kind of gave permission for at least some of his disciples to follow Jesus. And Andrew was one of those who followed Jesus. The first thing that Jesus said to Andrew when he saw him following him was, "What do you want?" Well, this might have been just a way to start the conversation. But actually, this is the most fundamental question of life. What do you want? What do you want from life? What is it that you really want? Andrew, what makes you happy? What are you striving for? What is the real thing in your life? What do you want? And this is what Jesus is asking even today. The main question, what do you want? Andrew replied with a question. This was part of their culture. At least in Estonia, when somebody asks you, you don't normally answer with another question. But the Jewish boys were raised up in this way. When somebody asked you, you asked the question back. It was polite for them. So Andrew asks, "Teacher, where are you staying?" Again, this seems like a simple question to ask, where are you staying overnight? But the word to stay is a very important word in the Gospel of John. It repeats every now and then. For example, in the same chapter, John the Baptist tells about Jesus, "I saw the Spirit come down from heaven as a dove and remain or stay on him." The same word Jesus uses later on in a parable about the vine and its branches. And he says, "Remain or stay in me, as I also remain in you." And later on, "Remain in my love, stay in my love." So Andrew is asking, where are you staying? What is it that is so stable in you? What is it worth following? What is it that makes you eternal? What gives you life? And now Jesus answers, "Come and you will see." No deep statements, just come and you will see. Follow me. Again, this might have been an invitation from Jesus to see where he is staying overnight. But Jesus is also giving an answer to the question of life. If you are searching for questions of life, then Jesus says, "Come and follow me. Come and see. Come and taste." If you want to have a life that is deep, that is eternal, that is significant, come and see. And if you are not a follower of Jesus yet, and this is a statement that Jesus says even today, come and see, come and taste. Maybe you don't understand everything yet, but come and experience, come and see. And I encourage you to follow Jesus in this way. Okay, but back to Andrew. Andrew stayed with Jesus, watched his life, and what's the next thing he does in the morning? He goes and invites his older brother Peter. He brought Peter to Jesus. What a wonderful thing to say. Andrew brought his brother to Jesus. He didn't start to convince or convert his brother himself. Well, it was his older brother anyway. You know those older brothers. They are much more smarter and cleverer. But he said, "Come and taste. Come and see yourself. Come and experience." Andrew knew that when his brother would come to Jesus, then this would change his life. If I only could bring him to Jesus, to taste Jesus, to meet Jesus, to hear Jesus. So this is the first story about Andrew. He was an ordinary man, a younger brother, had 5 talents out of 10, but he was convinced that when somebody meets Jesus, then this will change his life. And this is something that we can do, everybody can do. We can all be Andrews or Andreas in our families. When we bring our children to church or to the VBS, then this is what we do. None of the big preachers, the famous preachers can do it with our children, with our family. But we can do that. And this is so important. This is what the Andrews can do, what everybody can do. We should do it. Bring your family, bring your children, maybe bring your brother, bring your grandma. Come and see, come and taste. This can happen in family events. I remember one wedding I led 2 years ago, and there was a relative of the couple who was in the wedding. And afterwards we chatted, and I invited her. We are starting an Alpha course in our church. This is a course, 11 weeks course. We run 2 times a year about the basics of Christianity. I invited this relative of the couple. Maybe you would like to explore who Jesus is. And she was ready. she came to the Alpha course and she became a Christian. Amen. And now she is one of the leaders of our church summer camps, now 2 years later. It was just a family event. Come and see Jesus. It can even happen on funerals. It was one time I was leading a funeral, a woman who had deceased, and after that I invited her husband, who was 80 years old. Would you like to come and see our church? He did, he stayed, he became a Christian, and I baptized him when he was 81 probably. Just being part of the family, come and see. We can all be those Andrews, inviting our family many times, all through the years. Let's look at the second story about Andrew. The second story is about two Greek people. The city of Jerusalem was located on a trade route between Rome and Egypt. And quite often people stayed in Jerusalem on this way. And now at some point there were two Greek people traveling, and they stayed in Jerusalem, and the gospel says they wanted to see Jesus. They approached Philip, one of the disciples, and asked, maybe we can see Jesus. Philip, for whatever reasons, took those two people to Andrew. And Andrew took those two Greek people to Jesus. Such a simple thing, but we see a pattern repeated here. Philip somehow knew that Andrew can bring people to Jesus. He's a bit maybe more connective or more bold. And that's how the two people from the town, they didn't know the disciples before, but they came to Jesus. A simple thing. Like this old guy, Valdeko, who runs those sailing camps in Estonia. We saw the picture of, and your teams have been helping. Being a Christian publicly. In his camp, there is about 100 plus kids and youth in this camp who come for the sailing. And then he has the morning prayers, and then he hands out the Gospel of Luke. Just come and see Jesus. Yes, we will do the sailing stuff, but come and see Jesus. I've experienced it myself. There's also a third story. Andrew, we meet the third time. Do you remember there's a story about Jesus? Once he feeds a multitude of people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. They have a big gathering, about 10,000 or more people, 5,000 men plus wives and children. We visited the Red Rocks recently with Pastor Pat, and it seats about 10,000. So it was about this amount of people who were listening to Jesus, even more. And by the end of the day, they get hungry, and Jesus asks if somebody has some bread or some food, and nobody has, and then he makes the miracle that a small boy has a picnic, 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish, and everybody gets fed out of this fish and bread. Now, did I leave something out? How did this boy happen to meet Jesus? Who brought this boy to Jesus? It was Andrew again. Again, while Jesus had been teaching and preaching, Andrew was walking around among the people somewhere there, maybe ushering in the people or talking to some people. And when there was the need that there's no food, then it was Andrew who brought this boy to Jesus. And then the miracle happened. But again, the same pattern happens. Andrew is the one who brings people to Jesus. It's so simple. No big preaching, no big writing, no big miracles, but bringing people to Jesus. And this is something your teams have been doing in Estonia. Last summer, Pastor Pat and others were helping in our VBS, or actually we call it Children's Arts and Bible Days. And before and during those days, we were building a children's playground on our church property. And you were doing a great job helping us. Thank you for that. And connecting to people. And this way, your people have been Andrews in Estonia. And one thing to thank you is that I want to give those pictures as a memory from this 10 years of partnership, Faith Mountain and Church of Kolgata, 10 years of blessed partnership. Thank you for being Andrews in Estonia.
Now, I get to receive the picture, but you guys were the Andrews. This will be displayed prominently. We won't forget.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, coming to Estonia is also being Andrews, talking to those people, helping those kids, this youth, and not only in Estonia. We can do it in our families, we can do it in our community and town, we can do it in our church where there are new people coming, just connecting to them. Isn't it so wonderful and relaxing? We do not have to be the Billy Grahams or the Andy Stanleys to bring people to Jesus.
Amen.
We can just say to our family, or to our neighbors, or to some people God leads us to in the groceries, come and see. I have experienced Jesus. Come and see. Crick and Minnie Poirier, who are missionaries from your church in Estonia, at some point they started a home group where they invited people, and there was one German lady living in Estonia whom they connected to and whom they invited to their home group. Her husband was against her going to any church. No, this is not what we do. We should not go to any church. But going to a home group, just visiting some friends, was something that her husband didn't care about. So she's attending now their home group and becoming closer to Christianity. We can do that, inviting somebody. I think that during the church history, for every Peter and John, there have been 10,000 Andrews. 10,000 times more Andrews for all the great preachers or great writers. The church inevitably needs those 5 talent people. Needs a lot of them. I'm reminded of one lady in our church whose job is that he's a surveyor. She goes from door to door, she has a map, and she has a questionnaire about what do people think about the prices of the goods or the politicians or sometimes about the values of people. So she fills in the questionnaires. That's her job, surveyor. But every now and then she tells that sometimes I have to do some ugly questionnaires, surveys. But sometimes I have questions about beliefs or values. And when I have those, I love those, because then I can say something about my faith. Or she says that most often I say that, well, if you want to explore some values, we have a Christian radio station. Do you know about that? This has this wavelength. And please listen to that. This is her way of being an Andrew or Andrea. Why do we invite people to Jesus? It's not because of guilt. It's not because of duty. It is when we've experienced the love, the freedom, the purpose, the significance, the hope, when we are still experiencing it. Not just we experienced it once when we got saved, but we are living in this life. We are still following Jesus. We are excited about that. And then it's easy to invite, come and see. Andrews never become famous like Peter's and John's. They will never write books that bring thousands to Christ. But they know their family. They know their neighbors. They meet people in the groceries, in the airplanes. And they invite people. Come and see. And the church needs, yes, the church needs the Peters and the Johns. But for every Peter and John, every church needs 100,000, 10,000 of Andrews. And we can all be Andrews. And I encourage you to be an Andrew or Andrea. In your family, come and see Jesus. In your community, come and see Jesus. In your church events where you meet new people, come and see Jesus. The world needs ordinary people, ordinary Andrews. Without the Andrews, the churches and the world will not function. And there are so many people who do not know Jesus yet. Even in America, the majority of the people do not follow Jesus, do not know him personally. The Gospel of John says, as long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. But until Christ comes again, we have work to do. And it's so simple to be like Andrew. And I challenge you and ask you, would you be an Andrew? Amen.